My name is Elias, and I'm 28. My professional life revolves around mending what's broken. Smartphones with shattered screens, laptops that refuse to wake up, and the occasional printer whose owner has forgotten the ancient ritual of turning it off and on again. I live in a quiet corner of a suburb just outside Portland, Oregon, a place where the chirping of finches is more common than the sound of human voices. My repair shop is modest, tucked into a strip mall between a laundromat that always smells of warm bleach and a flower store that has seen a revolving door of proprietors. I've been anchored here for 5 years, ever since my marriage ended. In the aftermath, I consciously stopped pursuing anything that wasn't grounded and predictable, and that philosophy extended to relationships. I find comfort in my routine, in the steady, unchanging rhythm of my days. But life, it seems, takes a special pleasure in disrupting such carefully constructed peace. It all began on a Tuesday morning, a few minutes past 9. I was turning the key in the lock of my shop's front door when I noticed a woman struggling with a pair of oversized cardboard boxes in front of the flower shop. My first assumption was that she was just a delivery driver. Her blonde hair was piled into a haphazard bun. She was wearing a baggy charcoal hoodie, and her jeans were streaked with what looked like a long and storied history with potting soil. I stepped forward and offered to hold the door for her. She offered a smile in return, a soft expression that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice a little strained. "I didn't realize these would be quite so cumbersome." "Don't worry about it," I replied with a shrug. "It happens to all of us." I didn't give the moment a second thought, but the following day she gave me a small wave as I was hauling a defunct all-in-one computer from the back of my truck. "You're the guy who fixes things, aren't you?" she called out. "On my good days," I answered. "On the bad ones, I just glare at them until they feel guilty and fix themselves." A genuine laugh escaped her. "I'm Clara." That was how it started. In the days that followed, I would catch glimpses of her through the large plate glass window of my shop. I'd see her carefully arranging bouquets, chatting with customers, or clutching a coffee mug with both hands as if it were a precious source of warmth against the Oregon chill. Our conversations were minimal at first, composed of simple greetings, the kind of casual hellos you offer a neighbor, all the while secretly hoping for a more meaningful exchange in return. A few days later, we found ourselves standing in line at the same local coffee spot. She was ahead of me, and when she reached the counter, she turned and offered to pay for my drink. "Absolutely not," I insisted. "You're the new face in the neighborhood. This one is my treat." She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Completely. A proper welcome to the block." A latte. She didn't protest. By the second week, an unspoken pattern had formed between us. Nothing formal, just brief chats during our work breaks, acknowledging nods from opposite ends of the parking lot, and the occasional shared, exasperated eye roll when a customer would conduct a loud phone conversation nearby. The place began to feel less like a series of automated daily tasks with her presence next door. One particularly sunny afternoon, a rarity for this part of the state, I saw her standing outside her shop with a crate of tiny succulents. She had smudges of dirt on her fingers, and a pencil was tucked behind her ear. She looked like she had stepped directly out of an indie film about healing and finding new beginnings. As I walked past, I let a line slip out, one of those half-joking things you say to break the ice. "You know, if we were actual neighbors, I'd probably end up falling for you by accident." It was meant to be a light, throwaway comment, but she looked up from her plants, a slow smile spreading across her face, and said, "Then it's a good thing we're just business neighbors." The way she delivered the line, not defensively, not flirtatiously, just with a simple honesty, felt like she was weary of the usual games people play. And perhaps she was. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had said. I'd intended it as a simple joke to make her laugh, but a sliver of me had been completely serious. And that was the part I didn't know how to handle. I saw her again the next morning. She was sitting on the curb behind her flower shop, sipping coffee from a flimsy paper cup that seemed inadequate for the morning cold. She had earbuds in, her legs crossed, almost as if she were trying to make herself smaller. I stood for a moment, a broken laptop tucked under my arm, debating whether to say something or just let her have her private moment. I decided to walk past anyway, offering a quiet, "Morning." She pulled one earbud out and glanced up. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it before. "Want half of this muffin?" I paused. That might be the kindest offer I've received all week. She broke off a generous piece and held it out to me. "Don't ever say I never gave you anything." We sat there for a few minutes in comfortable silence, just eating and listening to the distant sound of someone sweeping the pavement. Finally, I broke the quiet. "Are you doing okay?" She didn't respond immediately. Then, looking straight ahead, she said, "Today's the anniversary." I waited, giving her the space to continue. "A year ago, I was supposed to be getting married." I watched her profile as she kept her gaze fixed on the distance. He left 3 weeks before the ceremony, just walked away. There was no cheating, no massive fight. He just said he didn't feel it anymore. A heavy pause hung in the air between us. "Sorry," she added quickly. That was probably way too heavy for a muffin-based conversation. I shook my head. "No, it's fine." I didn't tell her in that moment, but I understood that feeling all too well, that jarring dislocation when the person who was supposed to be your entire future suddenly becomes a stranger on an ordinary Tuesday. We didn't talk much more after that. I eventually pushed myself to my feet and said, "Well, if you ever need anything fixed besides electronics, I also handle malfunctioning coffee makers, stubborn remote controls, and emotional damage. Light repair only on that last one." She smiled again, and this time it was a genuine smile that truly reached her eyes. The days that followed settled into a quiet, gentle rhythm. We didn't exchange phone numbers or make plans to see each other outside of the strip mall, but every time our paths crossed, we would pause for a moment, for a brief word. It was just enough. One evening, I was closing up late, the shop bathed in low light as I attempted to organize a drawer overflowing with a tangled mess of cords that hadn't been touched in years. I heard a soft knock on the glass. Clara was standing in the doorway, holding a plastic food container. "I made way too much pasta," she explained. I looked from the container to her face, a small smile playing on my lips. That sounds like a very thinly veiled excuse to come hang out. Extremely thin. I cleared off a small workspace in the back of the shop. We ate in silence at first, surrounded by the ghosts of technology, disassembled motherboards and old smartphone cases. I asked if she was originally from the area. "No," she said. "I was born in Arizona, moved to Oregon about 5 years ago with my ex. After he left, I stayed because I didn't want to feel like I was running away just because he did." She took a bite of pasta. "Besides, I actually like the rain." "That makes one of us," I murmured. She grinned. "Are you a local?" "Born and raised about 15 minutes from here. My grand act of rebellion was moving to the adjacent zip code." We both chuckled at that. Then she asked, "What about you? What's your story?" I looked down at the remains of my pasta. "I married young. We divorced 2 years ago. No big drama, we just stopped being on the same team." She nodded with a depth of understanding that went beyond her words. I continued. "I used to believe that if something was broken, you just had to try harder to fix it. But I've learned that sometimes things break for a very good reason." A beat of silence passed between us before she said, "I guess I'm not really looking for anything right now." "I'm in the same boat," I admitted, "but I wouldn't say my mind is completely closed to the idea either." "Same?" she echoed, her voice softer this time. She left soon after that. I stood in the doorway and watched her walk across the dimly lit parking lot, her jacket seeming a little too thin for the damp night air. The sound of her boots on the wet asphalt echoed in my mind for longer than it should have. Over that weekend, I found myself constantly glancing out the front window of my shop every time I heard a car door slam. I hated that about myself. I wasn't that person, the guy who anxiously waits for someone he barely knows. But there was something about Clara that felt familiar in a way I couldn't articulate. I finally saw her again on Sunday afternoon. She was outside her shop, trying to tape a sign advertising a special on succulents to her front window. I walked over and offered to hold it steady for her. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know, just thought I'd offer a hand." After a moment she asked, "Do you make a habit of helping all the new flower shop owners with their signs?" "Only the ones who share their muffins with me and overshare before 9 in the morning." She laughed, a bright, clear sound, and I swear, for a brief second, she looked at me as if I wasn't just the tech guy next door, but something more solid than that. After we finished hanging the sign, we just stood there for a moment. It was a strange kind of silence, not awkward, but full, as if the space between us was shifting. She turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like you're actively trying not to get too close to something, just because you're afraid of what it might mean if you did?" I held her gaze. She didn't elaborate, just gave a small nod and a faint smile before turning and going back inside her shop. I remained there for another 30 seconds, my hands shoved in my pockets, a thought crystallizing in my mind. Maybe some people don't enter your life with a burst of fireworks. Maybe some just quietly pull up a chair and sit with you until you finally notice they've been there all along. It was a Thursday in late September, perched on that delicate edge between the warmth of the sun and the bite of the wind. The kind of day that makes you unsure if you need a jacket or just a good excuse to linger outside. Clara and I had reached an unspoken agreement that we both appreciated our comfortable distance. We didn't text, we didn't make plans, we just seemed to occupy the same spaces at the same times with a frequency that defied mere coincidence. That week, a mutual acquaintance, Sasha, the cheerful barista from the coffee shop we both frequented, had managed to rope us into volunteering for a local charity drive. It involved sorting donations, stacking boxes, and folding mountains of clothes. We both agreed because resisting her enthusiastic request seemed like more effort than simply showing up. And so, there we were, inside a cavernous warehouse on the outskirts of town. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a monotonous hum as we stood across from each other at a long folding table, methodically sorting jeans into piles and trying our best not to speculate on the origins of the various mysterious stains we encountered. Clara had her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She wore no makeup, and her expression was neutral, but she seemed at ease, calm. It was as if keeping her hands busy was her way of outrunning whatever thoughts might be chasing her. We didn't speak much at first, sticking to practicalities. How many boxes were left to sort, whether we had earned a lunch break yet, and the strange nostalgia of seeing fashion from the early 2000s still in circulation. At one point, someone handed her a dated, slightly garish wedding dress. She held it up, a wry smirk on her face, and commented, "Well, I guess this one didn't quite work out." I chuckled. Somebody's dream just got donated to charity. We continued folding. Someone put on some music in the background, a low-volume station playing classic rock ballads. Landslide came on, which I would later learn was one of her favorite songs. As the afternoon wore on, The group of volunteers around us began to thin out. People left for other commitments, took phone calls, or wandered off in search of snacks. Before I knew it, it was just the two of us, working our way through a stack of jackets, standing side by side with an easy familiarity, as if we had been doing this together for years. She leaned against the edge of the table, arching her back in a subtle stretch, and let out a soft sigh. "I am officially tired of other people's clothes," she declared. "That was quick," I replied. "You lasted a lot longer than I did." She looked over at me, and a slow smile began to form on her lips. I don't know what prompted it. Maybe it was the dim lighting, the relative quiet of the warehouse, or the way a stray strand of her hair fell across her face. But I said it. "Imagine the two of us together." I joked. It would be a complete disaster. I delivered the line with my usual lightness, as if the humor could shield the part of me that desperately wanted to mean it. But this time, she didn't laugh. She didn't look away either. She just stood there, her gaze locked on mine. Then she tilted her head slightly and gave me the smallest, most vulnerable smile I had ever seen from her, a look that was both sad and incredibly warm. And then she said, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, "I do. A lot." Without another word, she turned, picked up a box of coats, and walked toward the back of the warehouse. There was no pause, no dramatic music cue, no lingering glance over her shoulder. Just a woman who had spoken a simple, unvarnished truth, and then walked away before I had the chance to ruin it with more words. I stood there like an idiot, still holding a half-folded jacket, my arms frozen, my brain struggling to catch up to what my ears had just processed. I do. A lot. I kept replaying the two short sentences in my mind, the tone, the timing, the way she hadn't waited for my reaction, as if she wasn't asking for anything in return, but simply offering a truth she hadn't intended to say out loud. We didn't speak again for the rest of the afternoon. We worked in separate corners of the warehouse, offering polite smiles when our eyes met, avoiding each other just enough to make it seem casual. When the event finally wrapped up, she grabbed her keys, gave Sasha a quick hug, and offered me a small wave from across the parking lot. No words were exchanged, but she gave me that same look again, the one that suggested she wanted to say something more, but was afraid she had already said too much. I drove home in complete silence, with no music to distract me, just the rhythm of the headlights on the road and the echo of her voice in my head. I do. A lot. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, meticulously replaying every conversation we had ever had, every shared smile, every comfortable silence, and I wondered how I could have been so blind. Blind to what? To the fact that I wasn't just folding jeans next to a woman who had been hurt. I was quietly, undeniably, falling for someone who had seen something in me before I had even seen it in myself. And for the first time in a very long time, that realization didn't fill me with fear. It just made me want to see her again. But I had no idea what to say now. What do you say to someone after they've told you, without really telling you, that they've imagined a life with you? And even more terrifying, what do you do when you realize you want that life too? The next morning, I arrived at work a full 20 minutes early, not even realizing it until I had unlocked the shop door and glanced at the clock on the wall. I hadn't slept well. I kept replaying her words, "I do, a lot," and the way she had said them, as if they had escaped without her permission. I tried to convince myself not to read too much into it. It was just a fleeting moment, I told myself. People say things when they're tired, when they're standing in a poorly lit warehouse folding strangers' clothes. That's all it was, wasn't it? Still, my eyes kept drifting to the front window. Her flower shop opened later than mine, so I knew I wouldn't see her this early. But I looked anyway. She didn't arrive until after 11. I caught a glimpse of her car pulling into a parking spot and immediately turned away, feeling as if I had been caught doing something illicit. It was pathetic. I was 28 years old, not 17. The bell above my shop door chimed at around 11:15. I looked up from the circuit board I was examining. It wasn't a customer. It was Clara. She was holding a small white box, the kind a single cupcake comes in. She walked into my shop with a casual air, as if she had done it 100 times before, even though this was the first. "A peace offering," she announced, "or an apology, whichever you think fits the situation better." She offered a small, hesitant smile. "For what?" I asked. "For saying something strange yesterday," she said, her gaze dropping to the box in her hands. "I wasn't expecting to, I don't know, say that out loud." I gestured toward the counter. "Do you want to sit down?" She nodded and followed me to the small bar stool I kept in the back, mostly for when I needed to work on delicate repairs. She perched on it, her hand still resting on the box, not looking at me directly. "I'm not really sure what that moment was," she began. "Maybe I was just tired, or maybe I meant it. Either way, it probably caught you off guard." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms over my chest, trying to project a coolness I absolutely did not feel. "Yeah," I admitted. "It did. But not in a bad way." My words made her look up at me. "It just got me thinking," I added, pausing as I searched for the right words that wouldn't make me sound like I had been obsessing over this all night, even though I had. "About how we started talking," I finally said, "and how effortless it's been. I don't know your favorite color or your middle name, but I know the way your voice softens when you're talking to an elderly woman buying lilies. I know that you tap your coffee cup twice with your finger when you're deep in thought, and that you never, ever eat the last bite of anything." She smiled softly at my observations. "That's very perceptive of you." A quiet settled over the space between us, not an awkward silence, but a heavy one, though not uncomfortable. She opened the box. Inside was a single, perfect slice of chocolate cake. "This is my official peace offering," she said, "because if we're going to start saying things we didn't mean to say, we should probably do it over something sweet." I let out a laugh, more out of relief than genuine humor. She used a small plastic fork she had brought with her to break off a piece and handed it to me. I took it. "Do you ever do that?" she asked. "Say something completely real and then immediately wish you could hit a rewind button?" "Yeah," I said, chewing slowly. "But sometimes I think those are the only things that are really worth saying." She nodded, as if she already knew that to be true, but needed to hear someone else say it anyway. We sat there for another 20 minutes, sharing the slice of cake and not saying much at all. Just being in the same room together felt like it was enough. Before she left, she paused at the door and turned back to me. "I don't want things to be weird between us," she said. "Me neither," I replied. "And I don't think they are. I think they're just shifting." I could tell she liked that word. She stepped outside, then turned back once more. "You fix things, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's the general idea." She held up a small, beat-up point-and-shoot film camera, the kind that was popular before smartphones took over. "My dad gave this to me when I was 14. I dropped it last night. Do you think you can fix it?" I took it from her hands. The lens was jammed, and one of the buttons was missing. "I can try," I said. "No guarantees." "Good," she replied. "Because I'm not sure I want any guarantees anyway." She left after that, with no hug, no dramatic parting moment, just the sight of her walking across the parking lot, leaving me with a broken camera and about a dozen more questions than I had started the day with. That night, long after I had locked up the shop, I sat at my workbench, carefully disassembling her camera piece by piece. I wasn't sure why I felt so invested in fixing it, but I suspected it had little to do with the camera itself. Maybe it was about the act of building something with your own hands, of taking something that was broken and patiently, meticulously putting it back together. It was a slow, intentional process, something that couldn't be rushed. I looked at the tiny button I needed to reattach and thought to myself, maybe this is how we're supposed to happen. Not all at once, not in a frantic rush, but one small, carefully placed piece at a time. A week went by. After I figured out how to fix the camera, I didn't rush the repair. I could have had it done in a day, 2 at the most, but something about the task made me want to take my time. It wasn't because the job was particularly difficult, but because it gave me a valid excuse to keep thinking about her. Clara didn't text me, and she didn't stop by the shop, but she didn't vanish either. I saw her almost every day through my front window, watering her flowers, rearranging her displays, laughing with her customers. The only thing that had changed was the way we looked at each other when our eyes happened to meet. It was no longer the look of strangers, or even of friends. It was the look of 2 people who had finally said something they couldn't take back. On Friday, just as I was getting ready to close, I walked over to her shop, the repaired camera tucked inside a small paper bag. She looked up the moment I stepped inside, and her face softened in a way that made it seem like she had been waiting for this exact moment, even if she hadn't consciously planned it. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she replied. I handed her the bag. She opened it, pulled out the camera, and stared at it as if it were a sacred object. "You fixed it?" "I did," I confirmed. "The lens turns, the shutter clicks. You'll still have to track down some film for it, but it's alive." She turned it over and over in her hands, her movements gentle, as if she were afraid of breaking it all over again. "Thank you," she said quietly. There was a pause, a long and significant one. Then she looked up at me, her eyes steady and clear. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Do we just go back to folding boxes and pretending that we don't think about each other?" I didn't answer immediately. I needed a second, because I had been asking myself that same question all week. "No," I said finally. "I don't want to go back to pretending." Her gaze didn't waver. She stood perfectly still. "I don't either," she said. There was a palpable weight in the room, as if something invisible that had been standing between us had finally gotten up and walked away. She stepped out from behind the counter and stood directly in front of me. "You should know, I'm not looking for some kind of whirlwind romance," she said. "I'm not 22 anymore. I don't need fireworks, but I do need something real. I need quiet. I need steady." I nodded. "I'm not trying to rush into anything," I said. "I just want to be where you are, whatever that looks like." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me feel like I had just said something she had been longing to hear, even if she didn't know it herself. She glanced down at the camera in her hands, then back up at me. "Still imagining us together?" she asked, her voice soft. I smiled back. "No," I said. "Now I'm living it." She didn't say anything in response. She just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my neck, a gesture that felt like the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time, I let myself hold her fully, completely, without any jokes or second-guessing, without waiting for the ground to inevitably fall out from under me. For the first time in a very long time, nothing felt temporary. Nothing felt like it needed to be protected by a layer of sarcasm or small talk. It just was. We spent that evening simply walking through the neighborhood, with no plan and no destination, just talking. We were really talking for the first time, without any filters, sharing stories about our lives, our pasts, the things that scared us, and the things we hoped for. Then, without any ceremony or overthinking, she asked, "Do you want to come over tomorrow? Just to hang out?" There were no hidden expectations in her voice. I said yes. The next day turned into the next week, and that week turned into the next month. Our relationship didn't explode into being, it unfolded. It was built on quiet breakfasts, movie nights on her comfortable couch, and long walks around the block. She would bring me leftover flowers on her slow days, and I would fix her small, broken gadgets she hadn't even asked me to look at. We didn't bother with labels, we didn't rush anything, but we both knew exactly what this was. About 3 months later, she kissed me right in the middle of my shop while I was trying to fix a customer's toaster. She pulled back and said, "Just so you know, I'm not going anywhere." And I replied, "Good." I had stopped just imagining us a long time ago. Tonight I was attempting to make her a proper dinner at my place. It was a big step, a domestic milestone I was probably overthinking. I wanted everything to be perfect. I'd chosen a recipe for blackened salmon with roasted asparagus, something that seemed sophisticated but manageable. I had the fish seasoned, the asparagus glistening with olive oil, and a playlist of her favorite mellow artists humming softly from the speaker in the living room. She was due to arrive any minute, and my nerves were a low thrum beneath my skin. The doorbell rang just as I was putting the salmon under the broiler. My heart did a little jump. I quickly washed my hands, wiped them on my jeans, and went to let her in. She looked beautiful, standing there in a simple green dress, her hair down, a bottle of wine in her hand. "Hi," she said, her smile instantly calming the frantic energy in my chest. "Hi," I said back, leaning in to kiss her. The kiss lingered, and for a moment I completely forgot about everything else. I forgot about the carefully set table, the asparagus in the oven, and especially the salmon cooking under the intense heat of the broiler. It was the smell that finally broke the spell. That acrid, unmistakable scent of something burning. My eyes flew open. Oh no! I rushed back into the kitchen. A plume of black smoke was billowing out of the oven. I threw it open, waving a dish towel frantically to clear the air as the smoke alarm began to screech, its piercing, high-pitched wail. The salmon fillets were charred beyond recognition, 2 blackened bricks sitting on the baking sheet. My perfect, sophisticated dinner was a disaster. I pulled the tray out, setting it on the stovetop with a clatter, and just stared at my failure. All that planning, all that effort, reduced to a smoky, inedible mess. "Elias," Clara said from behind me, her voice calm despite the blaring alarm. I turned to face her, my shoulders slumped in defeat. "I am so sorry," I said, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. "I can't believe I did that. I got distracted." I expected disappointment, maybe a little frustration. What I got instead was a laugh. Not a polite titter, but a full, warm, genuine laugh that filled the smoky kitchen. She walked over to me, navigating around the open oven door, and wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "It's okay," she murmured into my ear, her voice laced with amusement. I could feel her smile against my skin. She gave me a gentle squeeze. "You're the main course anyway."